Ethan had always been a man who noticed the little things. The subtle change in someone's tone, the slight hesitation in their movements. Details that others might overlook never escaped his sharp eye. That's why, when Lily rushed out of the house that afternoon, clutching her purse and muttering something about running errands, a faint alarm bell rang in his head. "Sir!" She had been distant lately, offering smiles that didn't quite reach her eyes and excuses that felt rehearsed. Today was no different. "I'll only be an hour tops," she'd said, her voice overly casual as she slipped on her coat. But her eyes flicked away when Ethan asked where she was headed, and she didn't wait for him to respond before she was out the door. Sitting in the quiet of their living room, Ethan's mind churned. It wasn't like him to jump to conclusions, but something about her rushed departure gnawed at him. Maybe it was the way she had smoothed her hair and dabbed on a touch of lipstick before leaving, a ritual she reserved for special occasions, or, in the past, for him. Unable to shake his unease, Ethan picked up her tablet, which he'd left charging on the kitchen counter. She was meticulous about keeping it synced to her phone, and sure enough, the location tracking app was still logged in. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the screen. This was crossing a line, wasn't it? But then again, if she had nothing to hide, what was the harm? The app loaded, revealing Lily's location, a small cafe on the other side of town. Ethan frowned. It wasn't near any of the places she typically shopped or ran errands. He zoomed in on the map, his stomach tightening as the little blue dot settled firmly in the middle of the cafe. "Neat errands," he muttered under his breath. His mind raced with possibilities, each more troubling than the last. He told himself it could be innocent. Maybe she was meeting a friend, or she'd stopped for coffee on her way to the store. But deep down, he knew the truth was likely far less innocent. Grabbing his keys, Ethan slipped on his shoes and headed for the door. He wasn't the type to let doubt fester. If something was happening, he'd find out. And this time, he would make sure he had the answers. Answers he couldn't ignore. The cafe sat tucked away on a quiet street, lined with boutique shops and leafy trees, the sort of place couples frequented for romantic rendezvous. As Ethan parked his car across the street, he took a deep breath, willing himself to stay calm. His heart pounded against his ribs, but he forced himself to act with clarity. If his suspicions were unfounded, the worst that could happen was a bit of embarrassment. But if he was right, well, that was a bridge he would cross soon enough. Ethan sat in his car for a moment, surveying the cafe. It was cozy and inviting, with soft yellow lighting and large windows that gave a clear view of the interior. He scanned the room, his gaze moving from table to table until it landed on a familiar figure. There she was. Lily sat at a small cornered table, her back partially turned toward the window. She was laughing, her smile wide and genuine, so different from the reserved expression she'd worn around him lately. Opposite her sat a man Ethan didn't recognize. He was around the same age as Ethan, maybe a little younger, with an easy confidence that showed in the way he leaned toward Lily. They were holding hands across the table, her fingers lightly brushing his. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs in a sharp exhale. He had half expected this, but seeing it confirmed made his stomach churn. He clenched the steering wheel, his knuckles white, as 1,000 emotions crashed over him. Anger, hurt, betrayal. But above all, a strange sense of clarity emerged. This was the proof he needed. Undeniable and inescapable. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. If he was going to confront her, he needed evidence. Carefully, he stepped out of the car, keeping to the shadows of the street as he approached the cafe. From the angle near the window, he had a perfect view of their table. He snapped a series of photos, making sure to capture every detail. The way Lily leaned forward, her hand intertwined with the man's. The way they exchanged soft smiles as though they were the only two people in the world. For a moment, Ethan considered walking away. He had what he came for. He didn't need to make a scene, didn't need to air their dirty laundry in public. But as he stood there, Watching the woman he had shared a life with gaze at another man with such tenderness, something inside him snapped. This wasn't just about catching her in a lie. It was about reclaiming his dignity, about making sure she couldn't weasel her way out of this with half-truths and excuses. He lingered for a few minutes longer, taking in every detail of their interaction. The man, Jake as he would later learn, was relaxed and confident, clearly at ease with the situation. Lily's demeanor was more guarded. She glanced over her shoulder once or twice, as though sensing the possibility of discovery. "It's all very well, but I have to go home." Ethan didn't wait any longer. He had seen enough. Pocketing his phone, he straightened his shoulders and walked toward the cafe door, his steps steady and deliberate. Whatever happened next, he would face it head-on. This was no longer about suspicion. This was about exposing the truth, no matter how painful it might be. The soft jingle of the cafe door opening was barely noticed by the patrons inside. Ethan stepped into the warm, coffee-scented air, his sharp gaze immediately locking on the table in the corner. Lily's laughter floated toward him, unguarded and carefree, a sound he hadn't heard in months. Her back was still to him, and she hadn't noticed his arrival. Ethan moved slowly, his footsteps deliberate but quiet. He had no intention of rushing this. As he closed the distance to their table, Jake looked up first, his relaxed demeanor stiffening the moment he realized a stranger was approaching them. His brow furrowed slightly, and his grip on Lily's hand slackened. Lily, oblivious to the shift in Jake's expression, continued talking. It wasn't until Ethan was standing beside their table that she turned her head. Her smile froze, her eyes widening in a mix of shock and panic. She immediately pulled her hand from Jake's, her body stiffening as though she could somehow undo the scene Ethan had just witnessed. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "what are you doing here?" Ethan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he set his phone on the table, the screen displaying a series of photos he had just taken from outside. The image of Lily holding hands with Jake was unmistakable, the warmth in her expression undeniable. The color drained from her face as she stared at the evidence. "I could ask you the same question," Ethan said, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Errands, was it? Or did you mean sneaking off to hold hands with someone else?" Jake, who had been silent up until now, cleared his throat. "Look, man, I don't know what you think is going on." "Oh, I know exactly what's going on," Ethan interrupted, turning his attention to Jake. His calm tone made the confrontation even more unsettling. "You're the guy my wife sneaks off to see, the one she lies to my face about." "Am I missing anything?" Lily's voice rose in a panicked stammer. "Ethan, this isn't what it looks like. Please, let me explain." He raised a hand to silence her. "Explain? What's there to explain? The pictures speak for themselves. Your actions speak for themselves." The cafe had gone silent. Other patrons glanced over their shoulders, some openly staring. The soft clatter of dishes from the kitchen was the only sound breaking the tension. Lily shifted uncomfortably in her seat, her composure crumbling under the weight of the public exposure. Jake, now visibly uncomfortable, stood up. "This isn't my business," he muttered, attempting to walk away. "Oh, you're not going anywhere," Ethan said, his voice cutting through the air like a knife. "You wanted to be part of this? Then stay and hear the truth." Ethan turned back to Lily, his eyes filled with cold resolve. "You lied to me, over and over. And you know what hurts the most? You didn't even have the decency to end things before starting something new. Now the world knows exactly who you are." As he finished speaking, the weight of his words lingered in the air, leaving Lily and Jake frozen in place, unable to escape the humiliation they'd created for themselves. The cafe was alive with murmurs and glances after Ethan's confrontation. Conversations had hushed, replaced by the quiet hum of speculation as patrons exchanged whispers about what they had just witnessed. The tension was palpable, pressing down on Lily and Jake as if the weight of the entire room had turned against them. Lily looked around, her eyes darting to the gawking faces. She tried to compose herself, smoothing her trembling hands against her skirt. But the damage was already done. There was no salvaging the situation. Jake, on the other hand, stood awkwardly beside the table, his bravado from earlier completely gone. The confidence that had made him so bold in his affair had evaporated in the face of public exposure. "And can we not do this here?" Lily's voice was a strained whisper, her earlier panic now tinged with desperation. "Let's go home and talk about this privately." Ethan shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "You didn't care about privacy when you came here with him," he said, gesturing to Jake. "So why should I? This is the mess you made, Lily. Own it." Her face flushed deep red and she shrank back in her chair. Jake finally spoke up, his voice low but firm. "Look, this doesn't have to be a scene. We're all adults here. Let's just—" "A scene?" Ethan's voice cut through Jake's words like a whip. "You think this isn't a scene? You made it one the moment you decided to sneak around with someone else's wife. Don't talk to me about acting like adults. You didn't think about that when you walked into this cafe with her." Jake bristled but said nothing, clearly out of his depth. The awkward silence between the three of them only fueled the growing interest of the other patrons. The cafe manager, a young woman with a nervous smile, hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene or let the situation play out. Ethan turned back to Lily, his voice lower now but no less resolute. "You told me you loved me, that you were committed to us. Were those all lies too? Or was it just easier to hide behind them while you pursued whatever this is?" Lily's eyes filled with tears, but Ethan could see no remorse in them, only the regret of being caught. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this." Ethan's laugh was humorless, sharp. "That's the problem, Lily. You didn't mean for me to find out. Not that you didn't mean to betray me. That's all I needed to hear." Ethan settled onto a slight bench, pressing his hands to his forehead. Word of the confrontation spread faster than either of them could have anticipated. Within hours, Ethan began receiving texts from friends and family, some shocked, others supportive. Mutual friends of the couple began to take sides, and it became clear that Lily and Jake's actions were not going to stay confined to the walls of the cafe. Jake, desperate to salvage his reputation, tried to downplay the affair, but Ethan made sure the truth was clear. He sent the photos and videos he'd taken to a select few close friends, ensuring that Lily's deceit wasn't something she could twist or deny. The betrayal became a stain she couldn't wash away, and the social fallout began to close in on her like a storm. Ethan walked out of the cafe that day with his head held high, leaving Lily and Jake to face the consequences of their actions alone. For them, the world had suddenly become much smaller. For Ethan, it was the first step toward reclaiming his life. Ethan sat in his now quiet living room, the dim light of dusk seeping through the curtains. The confrontation at the cafe had been a whirlwind of emotion and exposure, but now, in the stillness, a profound emptiness settled over him. This wasn't the life he had envisioned. The betrayal, the humiliation, the crumbling of a marriage he had once cherished. It all felt surreal. But if there was one thing he was certain of, it was that he couldn't dwell in this pain forever. He had to move forward, even if the path was unclear. The following morning, Ethan began taking the first steps to untangle himself from the life he had built with Lily. He reached out to a divorce attorney, laying out the details of what had transpired. The attorney, a sharp and empathetic woman named Amanda, listened intently, offering both legal advice and reassurance. "You're doing the right thing," she said firmly. "This isn't just about ending a marriage. It's about reclaiming your dignity and starting fresh." The divorce process was draining, both emotionally and mentally. Lily made attempts to reach out, sending Ethan long apologetic text messages and leaving voicemails filled with pleas for forgiveness. She insisted the affair had been a mistake, a momentary lapse in judgment. But Ethan saw through her words. They weren't rooted in genuine remorse. They were born of fear. Fear of losing the stability and comfort their marriage had provided. Lily's family, once warm and welcoming toward Ethan, reached out as well, expressing shock and disbelief at her actions. Her mother called him, her voice trembling with emotion, to apologize on Lily's behalf. "I don't know what's gotten into her," she said tearfully. "You deserve better than this." Ethan appreciated their support, but he knew this wasn't about winning sympathy or approval. It was about closing a chapter that had become toxic. He responded politely but firmly, making it clear that while he appreciated their concern, his decision to leave was final. As the days turned into weeks, the social fallout from the affair continued to ripple through their circle of friends. Jake became a pariah, his once confident demeanor reduced to a shadow of its former self. Word of the affair had reached his workplace, and while it didn't result in his termination, the whispers and cold shoulders from colleagues were punishment enough. He stopped accompanying Lily in public, leaving her to face the brunt of the scrutiny alone. Lily, too, felt the sting of isolation. Friends who had once admired her charm and charisma now avoided her. Invitations to gatherings stopped coming, and her social media accounts became a battleground of judgment and speculation. She tried to portray herself as a victim, posting cryptic messages about heartbreak and forgiveness, but the facade crumbled under the weight of her actions. Meanwhile, Ethan began to rebuild his life, one step at a time. He took up running, finding solace in the rhythmic pounding of his feet against the pavement. It became a way to clear his mind and regain a sense of control over his body and thoughts. He also reconnected with old friends, people he had lost touch with during the years he had poured all his energy into his marriage. Their support was unwavering, reminding him that he was not alone in this journey. One day, while sorting through boxes of shared belongings, Ethan stumbled upon a photo album filled with memories of happier times. For a moment, he felt a pang of sadness, a reminder of what had been lost. But as he flipped through the pages, he realized something important. Those memories, while precious, no longer the man who had been blindsided by betrayal. He was stronger, wiser, and more resilient than he had ever given himself credit for. By the time the divorce was finalized, Ethan felt a renewed sense of freedom. He sold the house he had shared with Lily and moved into a smaller, cozier apartment. It wasn't grand, but it was his, a space where he could start anew without the weight of the past looming over him. Ethan also began exploring new opportunities, both professionally and personally. He took up photography, a hobby he had always been passionate about but had put aside during his marriage. Through the lens of his camera, he saw the world with fresh eyes, capturing moments of beauty and simplicity that reminded him life was still full of promise. In the end, Ethan didn't just survive the fallout of Lily's betrayal. He thrived. The experience had been painful, but it had also taught him invaluable lessons about self-respect, resilience, and the importance of letting go of what no longer served him. While the scars of the past would always be there, they were no longer wounds. They were reminders of a journey that had made him stronger. As he stood on a beach one evening, camera in hand, capturing the vibrant hues of the sunset, Ethan felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The chapter with Lily was closed, and in its place was a blank page, ready for him to write his own story. One built on trust, honesty, and above all, the strength to move forward.